So now that we've covered how you can digitize your geofilter in Adobe Illustrator using the image trace functionality and getting that more organic feel, in this lesson we're going to learn how you can get a more precise and clean feel using the pen tool in Adobe Illustrator. So we have our sketch on our desktop that we imported from our phone using a cloud service like Dropbox or Google Drive, or simply by emailing it to ourselves, and we just saved it onto our desktop. Now we're going to go over to Adobe Illustrator, and then we're going to create a new file, and you can do that by going to the menu bar, selecting File, and then New. And this is going to be 1080 pixels wide by 1920 pixels wide, and then the orientation will be portrait or vertical, and you can ignore the bleeds. The color mode should be RGB, and then the raster effects can be up to 300 pixels per inch, so we're going to keep it at that, and then you could go ahead and select OK. Then you can import your image using File and then Place, and then you could find your image on your desktop, select Place, and then click and drag a box to fill that area with your image, and then we can go ahead and drag this down to the area we want it to, and then as you can see in the Layers panel, or if you can't see it, you can go to Windows and then Layers, make sure that it's checked, and then we could create a new layer by selecting the new layer icon at the bottom of the Layers panel, and this is going to create a new layer on top of the image layer. Now what we're going to do is reselect the image layer, go to the icon in the top right corner, select that, and then click on Template. And this is going to lock the image layer as well as create a transparency in it, so when we go to do the pen tool on top of the sketch, the pen tool is going to show up a little bit better rather than the image getting in the way. So then we reselect layer 2, and then what we're going to want to do is zoom in on our sketch a little bit better, and you can do this by using the zoom tool in the tools panel. You could just click and drag, and then go ahead and select the pen tool from the toolbar on the left. Now the pen tool works by creating lines and paths out of anchor points and Bezier curves. And these are good because you can create shapes out of these points and curves and have really smooth edges. And the way to plot these anchor points is by clicking on the extremities of curves as well as the places where there's a distinct change in direction. So what you can do is, as you can see on this curve, the furthest point out from this curve is towards the middle of that curve, and it's at the very topmost part of that curve. So we want to plot a point there, and then you also want to plot one around all of the curves and the extremities of those curves. And any other change in direction you want to plot a point. So let's just go ahead, and we can see that that's probably the furthest out of that side curve. And then on the inside of this curve, we can see that this is the furthest point of that curve. And then as well at the bottom, another one on the left side. And then we could do it again at this corner. And then there's another corner which is a change in direction. And the extremity of this curve is about right here. The extremity of this curve is right here where it starts to change directions. Same here, it starts to change directions, and that's the extremity of that curve. And the same here, the same at the very top of this, and the same on the side of this, and at these two corners. And then we can just go back to the extremity of this curve as well to complete the shape. Now it looks a little bit weird because we haven't adjusted the Bezier curves of these points, so it's just doing a direct change in direction without any smooth transitions between those points. So you can either do this by just clicking and dragging points, so you could adjust the curves as you go, and then just finish off those curves by clicking and dragging. But what I like to do is plot the points first, like I did it with this S. And what you can then go to is the tool panel where it says pen tool. Click and hold on the pen tool and then go to anchor point tool, or just use Shift C to get to that quickly. And I like to adjust the points afterwards after I've already plotted my points. So let's zoom in a little bit here. And what you can do is click and drag on these points and bring out those handles a bit. And what this will do is bring out the handles so there's more of a curve to it. And then you can go to the second point that's next to it, bring out those handles a bit, and it will complete the rest of that shape. Now what I like to do is, after I make some of those adjustments, you can see that it's not fitting correctly on this edge, so you can grab your direct selection tool and select just one of those anchor points and bring that down to fix it a little bit, and then go back to your convert anchor point tool and then click and drag on one of these handles if you like to make it a little bit more smooth. But a good rule of thumb is to make sure that each point carries about 50% of that curve. So if this is 50% and then this is 50%, they're both coming together to complete 100% of that curve. So if you didn't do that, it's going to look something like this. If you click and drag on an anchor point and make it complete the full curve, then what you're going to get is a complete curve. However, where there's anchor point transitions, this one hasn't been converted yet, so it's going to have a little bit of an angle or a corner to it where this curve meets this anchor point. So the reason why we have 50% and 50% is because you allow this part to get its curve as well as this other one to get its curve as well. Now we can then go ahead and bring this anchor point down a little bit, and we can increase that curve a bit too. And we could do the same here. Get a little bit more of that curve, and you'll see that we'll get a extra part of the curve that we don't want because this is a corner. So then what you can do is, by clicking and dragging and completing that curve, after you're done with that, you can grab the anchor point tool and then click on the handle on the far side. And this will get rid of that curve and give you that corner that you're looking for. And then you could go ahead and do this for the rest of your design or your letters by just clicking and dragging with the anchor point tool to complete those 50% curves, and then going ahead and moving around those anchor points to make it fit the edges of your sketch. So after you've completed converting all those anchor points into smoother Bezier curves, you can then select your completed shape with the selection tool and then go over to the color palette, and you could switch these colors to have a solid fill on this shape. So then you could get a little bit of a better idea, because it's a little bit easier to see where there's a little bit more of those imperfections. And then you could go back and with your direct selection tool, select some anchor points, and then you can manually adjust those by just clicking and dragging on those handles and making those adjustments as needed. And when I vector things like my lettering, I like to keep a lot of the individual shapes of each letters separate, so I can go back and quickly edit just those parts rather than messing with the whole letter or even a whole word. So to give an example, I'm going to finish off this A. So as you can see, this A already has 3 distinct shapes to it. It has the line leading into the A, it has the bowl of the A, and then it has the stem of the A. Now I do this because if I wanted to change something later on, I can then just go back to that individual shape and adjust it, rather than adjusting the whole letter. Now go with the anchor point tool and go ahead and convert all these anchor points. So now with the anchor points converted, you can see that there's the 3 distinct shapes and they make up that A. And what we can do is because they don't look connected yet, what we can do is just select all three of those by just clicking and dragging over those to select them, and then go over to the swatches, and you can flip this around or just make sure that this is filled black and this doesn't have a stroke. And we can swap those, and you can see that it makes up that A without looking like it's three distinct shapes. So then you could do it one more time with all of the other letters with the pen tool, or any of the other shapes you have that you're vectoring. And you can do Command X or Control X to convert it back to just the stroke being black and having no fill, so you can easily see where you're drawing. And then clicking those anchor points and completing it by clicking on that first anchor point again. Grab your anchor point tool and then start converting these to about 50% of that curve, letting go, and then completing the rest of that curve with the second point. And if you happen to get a little bit off as far as where you placed your points, you can click and hold or tap and hold on the spacebar as you're clicking and dragging your anchor points to move around your anchor point to where it fits a little bit better. And then just let go of the spacebar, and then you can continue to adjust that anchor point. And for those corners, just delete it by clicking on the handle. And there you see it's starting to come together as we continue to create those paths with the pen tool and then adjusting those anchor points using the anchor point tool. So I'm going to continue doing the rest of this, but I'm going to speed it up so we can go on to the next portion. So now that you've finished tracing over your geofilter sketch with the pen tool, you should have a bunch of different shapes that you can go ahead and edit and refine. And once you're ready to finalize your design and you feel like it's ready after all your edits, you're going to want to unite all these different shapes into one shape. And you can do that by selecting all of these shapes by dragging over them. And you can see that each of these are different. Then go over to the Pathfinder panel. And if you don't find the Pathfinder panel, you can go to Window and you can scroll down to where it says Pathfinder and select it. And it should open up the panel, and go to Shape Modes and then select Unite. And it's going to turn all those different shapes into one solid shape. Once it's been turned into one shape, you can then go over to the Layers panel, and you could toggle the visibility off on the geofilter sketch so you can just see the pen tool creation from your sketch. And once it's been united into a single shape, you can then select the complete shape, and then you can go over to the color panel or this color swatch in the toolbar and then select the fill by double clicking it and selecting a color, or you can go over to the fill swatches and select the one that you want. I'm going to select white. And if you want to create a drop shadow, you can then go over to the effect option in the menu bar, select effect, go to stylize and then drop shadow, and then you can select preview. And this should have the similar settings that we had before. So it's going to have 0 offset on the Y and X axis and about a 65% opacity with a 5 pixel blur. And we're going to keep it at a black color because we want that contrast between the black and the white. And now, since we have that, if we wanted to instead do a border around this, we can get rid of that drop shadow by going to the layers panel and then selecting this appearance button and then just dragging that gray dot to the trash can, and it will get rid of that drop shadow. So we can go ahead and reselect that sketch and go over to the stroke swatches. So this is the fill swatches, then we could go over to the stroke swatches and then pick a color, and this is going to give us a small border around the whole thing. And if we want to increase that to be more of a background, we can increase it to something like 15 pixels. And then we could go over to the stroke panel, which is on the right side, and then we can select a line stroke to the outside, and this is going to make sure that it doesn't interfere with our lettering or your sketch. And then we could deselect that. What you can also do is go back to that strokes panel and select the round cap and also round corners or round joints, and this will make sure that it will kind of clean up all those rough edges or the sharp points. And as you can see, we have a lot of trapped white space between here, so if we wanted to fill that in, we can just go over to the layers panel and create a new layer below the layer 2 with our geofilter, and then we could go ahead and close that layer panel and go to the tools, select the paintbrush tool, click and hold on it, and then get the blob brush tool, and we could zoom in on here, make sure that that green is selected, and then just click and drag to fill in those white areas with green. And this you could draw on top of the sketch as well, because it's only going to show below that sketch or below your filter because it is on a different layer. Now this is just an easy way to fill in these little gaps, but if you want to do a little bit of a cleaner background, you can of course use the pen tool to create your own custom background that fits exactly the way you want it. Now if we happen to color in our geofilter a little bit too much, we can go over to the tools panel and select the eraser, or you can also select Shift E on your keyboard and this should bring up the eraser. And because this is going to be on the layer below our geofilter, we can erase even on top of the actual geofilter and it won't erase that part. It will just erase the blob brush that we did below it. And then you could go ahead and grab the blob brush again and then just fill it in as you'd like. Now that's how you can add freeform shapes using the pen tool, but if you happen to have more geometric shapes, you can also go over to the tools panel and select the rectangle tool, and you could draw out different shapes and fill those in as well. Or you could click and hold on that rectangle tool to access the rounded rectangle tool, ellipse tool, polygon tool, star tool, and flare tool, but most of all you'll probably use rectangles, circles, and different polygons. So that's where you can do it there. You can also use the line tool if you have a bunch of lines, and that's how you can add those more precise geometric shapes. And so once you're finished, you could then go ahead and save it as your geofilter. And you can even go to File, Export, and then Save for Web. And this is going to be the way you can export this geofilter as a file that you can submit. And what you can do is go over to the right side of the screen and then select PNG 24. Make sure that transparency is selected. Make sure that the width is 1080 and the height is 1920 pixels. And then you could go ahead and select save. It's going to save as a PNG, and you could just save this to your desktop. However, if you happen to have Photoshop, I also like to go to Photoshop, and we can then open up the new geofilter. Then we could change that width to 1080, and it should change that height. You can go to 1920 at the height, and make sure that you crop to the media box rather than bounding box, and then you could select OK. And this is going to open up that geofilter file, and what you can do is then export this as an image. Go to File, Export, Export As, and you should be brought with this dialog box, and you could format this using PNG format, and then you could select transparency, make sure the width is 1080, the height is 1920, and scale is 100, and then you could select export all, and then just save this as another version of that. And so there you have it. There's you could check the desktop, and we could see that we have our geofilter file from the Illustrator document. Then we have the first export out of Adobe Illustrator of the PNG file, and this is just another option that you can export out of Photoshop as well. So that's how you can digitize your geofilter using Adobe Illustrator and the pen tool. And in the next lesson, we're going to cover how you can digitize your geofilter using Adobe Photoshop.